Welcome everyone. So as Claire said, my name is Rachel Cable and I'm the head of Oxfam Cymru. So I'm going to take us through this next little section and I'm going to invite all four candidates just to make a brief opening statement. If we could aim for about 2 minutes, that would be great, but I won't cut you off immediately. Although if you are going on a little bit, I will step in and urge you to finish your point. And what we'll do with these opening statements is we'll go in alphabetical order by surname. So I'll come to Callum first, then Jane, then Lena, and then Di. And I will give you a little nudge if you're going on. So as you know, today's hustings are about global development and humanitarian aid. So if we could hear your opening thoughts for 2 minutes, that would be really welcome. Callum, can we kick off with you, please?
Great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me this afternoon. Firstly, I want to say I'm a strong supporter of international aid. I was actually disappointed that the decision had to be taken by the UK government to cut aid for the next year to 0.5% of GDP, as I support the statutory target of 0.7%. However, I totally understand, given the financial difficulties coronavirus has brought to our shores, the reduction, and do not object to a short-term cut like this. The UK Conservative government has also pledged to spend more than £10 billion next year to fight poverty, tackle climate change, and improve global health through the age budget. But I will not be happy if spending was not returned to normal levels by the end of the Parliament. I believe in international aid because it is an essential component of soft power, all the more important given the way the threshold for the use of hard power is higher than ever before. The PR problem overseas aid has had over the years, I think, is down to selective examples of when implementation of the aid has been haphazard. I wonder if you can guess the example that always comes to my mind, which is the Ethiopian Spice Girls. And obviously that's the problem. We need the good examples more at the forefront. With China flexing its muscles in the most startling ways, and its modus operandi of creating indebtedness among poorer countries through its Belt and Road Initiative, it's only right that we make sure international aid matches the UK foreign policy and ensuring the money is spent properly and not used by the corrupt for their own means. That's why I didn't oppose the merging of the Foreign Office and DFID. You may know that I've not really spoken about Wales's role yet, and that is because I don't really believe it should have one, at least not outside the framework of the UK. Foreign policy in aid is not devolved, and therefore action by the Welsh government here is entirely inappropriate and in the wrong hands could be used to undermine UK foreign policy, as the Welsh government did during the Brexit negotiations. Opposition parties often talk about respecting devolution, but that also means respecting what is not devolved too. Otherwise, the nation will become preoccupied with powers rather than doing good, as is the case with the Federalist Labour and Liberal Democrat parties and the Separatist Plaid Cymru party. However, if non-state organisations that are based entirely in Wales want to act, then why shouldn't they? I would support their work as long as it matched up with, generally with the UK government's foreign policy. The Welsh government should also work with the UK government to promote free trade with the global south to increase prosperity in those regions, export surplus COVID vaccines once our own programmes complete, and improve on our own carbon emissions to counter China and Russia's clientelism, as well as to tackle global poverty. I know not being active as a Welsh government in this area may not be what people attending this afternoon necessarily want to hear, but what I can tell you is that the Conservatives do believe in international aid, and that coming from the central UK government is where we are acting with purpose, including being the party that enshrined the 0.7% target in law. That leaves more money for the Welsh government to spend trying to fulfil its domestic commitments where it has failed poorly. I look forward to hearing your questions and indeed what the other candidates have to say this afternoon. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Callum. Jane, can I come to you next for your opening thoughts? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm really pleased to be here at this hustings this afternoon as a passionate supporter of our commitment to international relations, into our international strategy, and the important role that a Welsh Labour government has played over the past 22 years, and also in coalition and in partnership. I was very pleased to be a member of the External Affairs Committee when, in fact, I met with WOAG. But of course, now I have had, over the last 6 months or so, responsibility for international relations as Deputy Minister in the First Minister's office. And can I just say how important I think Hub Cymru Africa is? It plays such a key role. And I'm so pleased that we've fund and support Hub Recovery Africa and all their partners, an integral role to play in all of the support that we give to this sector. Obviously, it's been a very challenging year with the coronavirus and the pandemic, but actually we've managed to come together not just in terms of Wales, but with our partners across the world. And I've found that particularly meaningful at the Global Solidarity Summit. And that's what we must be about in Wales, global solidarity, a globally responsible nation, very much the heart of our Wellbeing of Future Generations legislation, which we're so proud of. But today is about Wales and the world. It is about our responsibility to the world. It's very close to my heart and close to your hearts, I know, for so many people living in Wales who want to feel connected about issues, not just on their doorstep, but around the world. And 15 years ago, Welsh Government launched the Wales for Africa programme. It was a Welsh contribution to what was then the Millennium Development Goals. Well, we've now changed it. It's become the Wales and Africa programme. It's about partnership, and I'm so pleased, and thank you for your excellent glossary of terms in terms of international development. This is about African-led partnerships that we've developed over the years with NGOs, particularly in Africa, but also across the world in terms of the way we can actually play our part in terms of international development. So I'm very proud of the fact that we do fund the Wales and Africa grant scheme. Even through these challenges, we've actually funded some of our partners in Africa who have been hit so hard by COVID, £650,000 provided to fund large and small Wales Africa projects. And also, of course, taking this forward, being globally responsible, is saying, no, we're not just okay, we think and we care about our partners across the world. So I was really pleased we could put out an extra £1 million, including funding to United Purpose Disaster and Emergencies Committee to help in countries to tackle the impact of COVID on their nations. We are
encourage you to wrap up, Jane.
We're part of establishing Wales as a globally responsible nation. And as far as I'm concerned, this is what we should do. Devolution is part of that. And I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon.
Many thanks indeed, Jane, for that. And then Lena, we'll come to you next, please.
Well, thank you very much, John, for having me. This is an extremely special hustings to me. The Welsh Liberal Democrats believe that Wales has a wealth of hidden potential when it comes to the part that we play in our global community. I'm a proud member of a globalist party, and we are actively working to be a globalist nation. And Wales can not only learn so much from our global community, but we have so much knowledge that we can share also. From agricultural advances in the way that we grow our food sustainably to boundary-pushing language technology to help save minority languages. We're global leaders, but we must also be global collaborators. And that's what we are looking to do. We are stronger here in Wales because of our diversity, and our nation is built on the many diaspora that came here, dating back hundreds of years. And I think that's a great story from across the world. And they've come here to call Wales their home. However, community cohesion isn't still where we need it to be just yet. And in 20 years of devolution, policy has been passed that actively villainizes a number of minority communities. We have people in the midst of the pandemic too scared to seek help because they don't know what data could be used against them by authorities. Myself and my party are working to end all of this and the discrimination that's rife in our life, in our communities, and within our world. We can be kinder, and I fully believe that. We need a government that represents the cosmopolitan Wales that we live in, honouring our past, understanding our present, to ensure the best future. My party practices that in what we do here in Wales. We've created a new curriculum built to nurture the generations to come as confident and compassionate citizens of the world. We're putting recovery first this election, and we know that Wales can do more to tackle the climate emergency, which is why we're pledging to a strong plan just for that. We're proud that Wales is a nation of sanctuary, and that we know that we need to do more work to recognise climate refugees within our policy making. We're incorporating a rights-based approach to our recovery to ensure that our policy making is inclusive and positive for the many communities here in Wales and across the world. We know that every action that we take here in Wales affects our role in our global community and the progress of our partnerships worldwide. I know that we are the party to deliver a global responsible Wales, and I challenge you to let us prove it by putting your faith in us. I look forward to your questions, and feel free to contact me during and after this event.
Many thanks indeed, Lena. And last but certainly not least, we'll come to Di. Over to you, Di.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Dr. Di Lloyd, and Plaid Cymru candidate standing in Swansea West in this May's election. I've been a GP in Swansea for 35 years, a lay preacher in South Wales for the last 29 years, and a member of the Senedd for 17 years. I believe that Wales has definitely a role to play in the world. In fact, it should be playing more of a role in the world. I mean, the Wales for Africa initiative is excellent. Plaid Cymru would build on that. From my medical background, I know medics here in Wales started a medical link up with Lesotho over 35 years ago, at Dolen Cyswllt Lesotho. That was an exchange, of equals. None of this patronizing giving money, but an exchange of equals in terms of Wales training medics and nurses from Lesotho, and our students from here going to Lesotho and being trained out there as well. Now that has developed in several other sub-Saharan countries since then, in terms of, and not just from medics, but also from teachers as well. There's a free exchange, and many NGOs are involved in that, which I haven't got the time to dwell on at the moment. So basically, Wales in the world, we need to be doing more for, as Wales in the world. Obviously, from a Plaid Cymru point of view, Wales would be a full member of the United Nations. We would push for a revamp of the United Nations. Why should certain big countries have a total veto on sensible decision making? The same goes with the WHO. Well, the World Health Organization needs to be strengthened to take care of vested interests. COVID, my final point, has proven that actually, if there's a pandemic anywhere, there's a pandemic everywhere. So it behoves us all to sort this out. Now, in terms of not just COVID, but also other diseases that we've not long neglected. Sleeping sickness, malaria, TB, measles kill millions in Africa. We think we've conquered them here. Well, that's not fair, is it? So yes, it's about fairness. It's about cancelling debt. I know tremendous work goes on. I'm involved in a little Christian charity that gets money for chapels and churches in the Middle East to sort out health and education in such desperate situation as in the middle of Aleppo, now in a war. So we know the challenges, they're extreme. We should do more individually. We certainly should do more as a nation of Wales.
Many thanks indeed, Diane. Thanks to all. So we've had some questions submitted in advance to us today, and there's also some questions I can see coming in the chat box. So I'm going to hand back over to Claire, who's going to kick us off with the first question.
Thanks, Rachel. To make the point that some of you will have already covered some of this in your opening statements, and we expect that might flow through the questions that get asked. So do feel free to repeat yourselves or also make the point that you've also covered it. The first two questions that came in from CAFOD, who are the Catholic Aid Agency, and United Purpose, who are a global development organisation, were quite similar in tone. So I'm going to kind of combine the both of them because they'll probably conclude with a similar answer. So United Purpose have said, considering international development isn't currently devolved, what do you see as Wales's role in global development? And do you support Wales having a role? And if you do, what should it be? And then CAFOD have asked something similar, but to give it the context of saying aid spending on tackling global poverty should not be treated as a charitable favour to the world, but as Britain's moral duty. And I'll exchange Wales here. And Wales and Britain became one of the world's wealthiest nations due to its long history of colonisation and use of fossil-fuelled industrialisation. So there's the context from CAFOD on what we think morally about the 0.7. So I'm going to go to Jane first, and we're going to just take this where we start with a different candidate each time. So Jane, if you want to come in probably broadly on the 0.7, and as it's not devolved, what Wales's role should be given our global history.
Well, I think the UK Tory UK government should be ashamed of itself for dropping the 0.7%, utterly ashamed of itself. And actually, our minister, Lynette Morgan, at the time wrote to Dominic Raab. She was writing about the fact that also we weren't happy with the merger of the Foreign Commonwealth Office and DFID as well, who's done such great work with that 0.7. And at the time, he wrote back, and that was last July, saying that they wouldn't be, they were committed to the 0.7. It's actually in law that 0.7%. I would say, actually, also, I was very proud that the Archbishop of Canterbury made that point on Easter Sunday, actually in his sermon. This is a globally responsible nation, and we should be supporting that. So we will continue with our commitment. And it is a choice. It's a political choice that we are making because we are a globally responsible nation. And can I just also say that I think looking outward to other countries helps us better understand our role in the world. We learn from each other about what solidarity truly means. And just in terms of what we can do in terms of tackling climate change, which is Cyfod's point as well, it is so important that we're backing Size of Wales, and 15 million trees that have been distributed to families and communities in eastern Uganda, I think sums up what our commitment is.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to go next to Lena.
Thank you very much. And it's a very important question. I think that, yes, of course, international development is not devolved. However, that should not stop our ambition to be able to do the best that we can and promote our hard work in Wales across the world, as well as build partnerships with other nations across the world. We're nothing without our global community, in my view. And I think that the most important bit for me and what I would like to see in the next Welsh government, and something that I would like to push, from my party, is that we need better long-term planning for many of the amazing initiatives we have here in Wales. A lot of the funding is year to year, and you don't know what you're going to get in the next year, and we don't know what financial situation could be just around the corner. We need to have better sustainable planning for the funding for the projects that we do. That needs to be set aside. And just like Jane, I was extremely disappointed to see that 0.7% cut. But to be honest, we could all see it coming like a slow train crash. Which was horrific and really made me lose faith. I mean, for myself, yes, I truly believe that we have a duty of care as Wales, as a part of Britain, to other nations, because if we want to build a strong partnership, we need to acknowledge, like I said, acknowledge our past, and we need to build the best future, not just for Wales, but for everyone. I don't believe in insular thinking. My party doesn't believe in insular thinking. It needs to be for everyone. I myself am a child of two parents from ex-colonial nations. That's something that I take very much to heart. My great uncle came to Wales to study as a colonial student. That was who he was. And I get to study here as a European student. That meant a lot to me. And I would like to see the same. I would like to see that collaborative approach, that change in the way that we presented ourselves as a nation in the past, and a positive impact that we can make in the future.
Thank you very much, Lena. I'm going to move to Di next, please.
Well, thank you, Claire. Well, it's about a partnership of equals. Yes, it is a disaster that the international aid budget has been cut. So basically, it's not devolved now. Well, why can't it be devolved in future is where Plaid Cymru comes from. We're marching towards an independent nation. We need to look after these sort of things ourselves to reflect our values. Over the years. Yeah, we know about colonialism and exploitation. There's a fair amount of it happened in the South Wales valleys and in coal mines and stuff. Nothing compared to the degree that has happened elsewhere. But colonialism is about, supremacy and domination. It's all about now a partnership of equals. And we should be equally sharing both our education, knowledge, and responsibilities. We should be cancelling international debt. The UK at the moment is running up massive debts. We don't worry about the repayments. We've been putting pressure on, a country like Zambia, because I've been involved with a couple of the hospitals in Zambia over the years, has to spend more than its health budget just servicing its international debt, just by paying the interest rates. That's not a worthwhile situation. It keeps people in debt keeps them poor. And really, the whole deforestation, climate change situation also has to be tackled as a partnership of equals. We have a role to play. Everybody has a role to play, and we should stop going around the world telling people what to do. It's a partnership of equals.
Thank you, Di. And then Callum, if you can join us next.
Sure, I'll try to be as quick as I can because I want to come back to what some people have said. So, like I said at the start, I am a strong supporter of international aid, and in circles on the centre right, I often find myself being the person in the room that's often arguing in favour of international aid. But I don't think it's a massive disaster that it's had a small cut at this time when there are extreme pressures on what's going on with our own fiscal situation nationally, which is why I think the point about cancelling debts, it just doesn't really feel relevant to, I think, the general public right now. And we have cancelled the debt of Africa before, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think, as a country. So I do think that that point, I don't really think is what people want at the moment. When it comes to the merger of the Foreign Office and DFID, there is a strategic logic behind that, about tying what we do with aid into what we need to see in our foreign policy. So in your question, I think you talked about a moral duty. Yes, I do think the UK has a moral duty to help the world's poorest. But I do think there's a way to use that, like you said, the question, just not in a charitable way, just give it away in that patronising way, but to use it strategically so we can have those built goals and counter the rising powers in the East, that it does make sense to do that. I'm not sure, I think it might have been Jane who mentioned something an archbishop said. Frankly, there's plenty of comments from left-wing archbishops in the paper, which I just don't match up with reality, really. And just the one thing that briefly that Di said about colonialism in Wales. I mean, I don't feel colonised at all. I feel like a part of Britain as much as we have been for over for about half a millennium now. And I'm pretty sure Adam Price got in trouble for talking about colonialism in Wales like that before. Going back to the main question about Wales's role in international aid, I think it is to support the UK government. It's not a devolved competence, so it shouldn't. I don't think it should be independently acting as a government in that way. As I said in my opening comments, non-state actors, non-state bodies, I think, as long as they don't contravene what's going on in the UK foreign policy in general, I think I'm very happy for them to act. In terms of Wales's role, if you're asking as a government, I think it's to support using the existing links it has now, since they do exist in the first place, to support UK goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Callum, for your answers. So I'm going to hand back over to Rachel now, and we'll start kind of narrowing down a little bit into specific issues rather than the kind of broad international aid as a broad brush item. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks very much, Claire. Thanks also. We're going to move on now specifically to talk about climate change. I don't know if you can see the questions in the Q&A box, but this is a question that's in the box and it's come to us previously. So this is something that's come from the Welsh Centre for International Affairs. And the question is, how would you and your party make the most of the global climate talks, COP26, coming up? And specifically, how will you and your party support the Climate Cymru campaign, which is aiming to take 50,000 Welsh voices to the talks later this year? So can we start with, where did we start? We started with Jane, didn't we, last time? So can we start with Lena this time?
Yeah, sure. And it's an excellent question. Personally, I support the Climate Cymru campaign, and I was really happy to see the crossover with Blue Stag. Always a big fan of their work as someone who works in tech myself. I think that it's a really great initiative, and I think it's something that's come at a really good time, simply because it's enabled us to campaign in a way that connects Welsh people to COP26. There's always this view when it comes to these conferences that we're the outsiders looking in, that we don't have a seat at the table, that our voices don't matter. And it's nice to see that change in culture on such an important topic. So in terms of climate change and COP26, I think that it's a split question, and that we have to campaign on things within that conference, but also what we can change here at home, which will then impact on our global community. So one thing that I'm quite eager to see, that my party is quite eager to see, is that we need to ensure that countries are adopting a much more ambitious emission target within their national plans. And that's something that we can push for, because it's not enough to saddle nations in an unequal way with what their targets should and shouldn't be, when you can look back at histories of those nations and see that actually what you're planning just doesn't make any sense. And if we're not putting in the right targets, we are just simply not going to make a difference. The science is there and we've got to face that. In terms of what we can do here, well, I'm proud that my party has set out some very comprehensive plans for a green COVID recovery, which of course will impact on the wider world. And that looks at things, so working to reskill people, working to recover from an economics point of view, from a health point of view in terms of mental health, and taking a trauma-based approach, which I think is extremely important. And of course, ensuring that businesses have the best ways to recover, which gives them that global aspect. It's not enough to say a green recovery. We've actually got to have a global green recovery. Why not have that start in Wales? Why not have us be ambitious?
Thank you, Lena. And Di, can I come to you next?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, obviously implied we support COP26 and the climate change emergency agenda, because it is an emergency. And we would support, obviously, Plaid Cymru government would bring forward Wales reaching zero carbon emissions, bring it forward from 2050 to 2035, demonstrating a Welsh government's commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So a bit of big picture. In terms of, let's go straight for deforestation, because we need to be tackling that. We're big supporters of Size of Wales, planting trees everywhere, but also making sure that we try, palm oil and such things that are imported, we need to think very hard about not doing that, because it is about protecting this very worthwhile planet. It's the only one we've got with so many billions on it now. We need to be able to share things equitably and always think of planet before we do anything.
Thank you very much, Di. Callum, can I come to you next?
Sure. So when it comes to the COP conference, I think that's a great idea. We're hosting it in one of the biggest cities in the UK. And obviously, that's a chance for us to showcase our policies as a UK government and talk about how we can, and then use the international community that are arriving there to spread that message far and wide about why they should be doing it as well, especially when we're trying to court support from the United States and build up relations there. And getting a really big actor like that on board is something that will spread the message of tackling climate change across the globe. And that one of those things would be investing in green industry. And that's exactly what we're talking about earlier with international aid. And that's the kind of strategic use of that. It's not just in terms of diplomacy, but in terms of tackling climate change. And that's an international example. Then nationally, the Welsh Conservatives aiming to create 65,000 new jobs in the next Parliament, with 15,000 of them being green jobs. Other measures we have, including being net zero by 2050, a Clean Air Act, a deposit return scheme for plastic bottles, a ban on single-use plastics and non-medical use. There's quite a lot of things that are on our agenda, which show we're a green party in that sense, as well as a £150 million Wales Marine Energy Investment Fund as well, which I'm glad is on our agenda. And these are the things I'm very supportive of. And when it comes to, because you're talking about Climate Cymru, about young voices coming and having their role in there, I think that's great. What they should make sure, though, is that they learn the lessons that have become problematic of the last few years, and which is that protests and protesters that don't really reflect public opinion and the reality. I think the public want to tackle climate change, but you can't just do it in a very brutal way. When Extinction Rebellion talk about net zero, I think by 2025, that's just not realistic. To do that would take us back into the dark ages almost. And that's not the way to win public opinion. And not only that, but their methods as well, in the way of halting traffic and bringing cities and commuters to a halt. That's not the way to go about it. So I'm hoping that that people do have their voice heard, as many people do as possible, but that it reflects the reality, and it's done so in a way that can bring a large amount of the public along with them. And I think that commitment, especially from the Welsh Conservatives and broadly from the other parties as well, meets that.
Thank you very much, Callum. And Jane, I'll come to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very proud that we were the first nation to declare a climate emergency, and it was fully backed in our Senedd. And I'm very pleased. I've also met with everyone engaged, not just in civic society, but including Extinction Rebellion. I'll recall a very interesting conference in City Hall, which some of you might have been involved in, where we were looking at climate change. Extinction Rebellion were engaging with us, but also loads of schools, loads of young people, and hearing from young people in schools across Wales about how they were, their passion about tackling climate change and what they expect of us elected representatives was very powerful. I mentioned the fact that Wales was the first fair trade nation as well back in 2006, and one of the most important events, it was virtual, that I attended earlier on this year in Fair Trade Fortnight was the event we had with Jennifer, the coffee grower from Uganda. It was a fair trade and climate change coffee morning. And I think some of you were there, and we were promoting and we are supporting Jennifer's, exporting Jennifer's coffee from the Mount Elgon area of Uganda. And she described her life, the devastation of climate change in her community and the impact it's having on organic farming, promoting fair trade coffee, which is what we're doing. And I'm so proud of the Size of Wales initiative and the fact that that's supported by charities, by the private sector, and we are making a difference as a result of the investment in the Inverley Trees programme. I've already mentioned that earlier on, but just to say, in terms of environmental sustainability and looking towards COP26, we're an active member of the Under 2 Coalition Steering Group for Europe, and that's a global community of state and regional governments committed to ambitious climate change in line with the Paris Agreement. It's absolutely behind the Paris Agreement and delivering on it. And also we're working to deliver our second low carbon delivery plan and playing a full part in the UN climate change conference, the COP26. And our work in Wales and Africa, it sums up the issues that we want to take forward in terms of being a globally responsible nation, addressing devastating impact of climate change. And just finally to say, we'll raise our ambition of our emissions targets, because we have to think local, national, global, don't we? And increase Wales's 2050 emissions reduction target to 95%. And we will ask the Senedd Cymru to put this into law.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you all. And just a quick clarification, thanks, Susie, in the chat box. Susie's just clarified that Climate Cymru is a campaign taking 50,000 voices from Wales to COP from all ages, locations, backgrounds and political affiliations. So it's not something that's exclusive to young people. Thanks for that, Susie. Claire, I will hand back to you for the next question.
I can hardly believe we've only got 20 minutes left. An hour felt like a long time, and now in the thick of it, it doesn't feel like very long at all. So I'm going to again pull a couple of questions together, one that we had in advance and one that we've had through the chat box, and it's very specific about deforestation, and it's also kind of about business and economy as well. So Angie from Size of Wales has asked it in the box about global habitats, beef, soy, palm oil, coffee and cacao, and how each party will sorry, there's so many questions coming through that it keeps nudging my screen up and I'm losing it. How will each party ensure it will be doing all it can to remove imported deforestation from the Welsh economy in order to tackle the climate and nature crisis? And then there's another question of a very similar wording, but I will just try and capture the essence of it, which is, how do we hold businesses accountable for practices throughout their supply chains to ensure that communities are protected from human rights abuses as well as environmental destruction? So you've kind of got human rights in supply chains and deforestation in supply chains as well. And I think we started with Lena last time. So I'm going to start with Di this time.
Great, thanks, and thank you for the question. Well, yes, as I mentioned, deforestation, we have to tackle that supremely. It is at the forefront of the climate change emergency, and I'm a big fan, a big supporter of the size of Wales, planting trees east Uganda and wherever else is required. Like most, I mean, when you think about it, most of the UK back in the day used to be covered in forests, you know, so there's a lot of work to be done. Yes, and also, as I mentioned earlier, we would look to stop the importation of palm oil and soy and things, if necessary by legislation, although it may well be part covered by legislation at the moment, but it's the enforcement of it. There's a huge difficulties, as implied in the question as regards supply chains and who exactly is enforcing what. But the intention would be to cut out the use of things like palm oil as a reflection of our commitment to the planet. In terms of also from an economic point of view, as a Plaid government would institute a 60,000 Greens jobs boost here in Wales. We'd look to develop the tidal lagoon, green energy everywhere. You know, in terms of getting rid of single disposable plastics as well. I mean, I know other people are saying this, but because I haven't mentioned it up to now, you're having that as well. So basically, you know, we have to, I mean, the take-home message is we have to take the planet seriously. It's no longer, you know, just the sort of side interest of a number of, you know, interested parties. This should be a global view. It should be the interest of us all, actually, because frankly, we've seen now, and as I said before, COVID exposes this. Whatever happens in one part of the world does affect us all. That's why we haven't managed to eliminate TB and malaria and measles and other diseases yet, because they are still hugely prevalent in Africa and other nations. So it behoves us all to take the whole situation seriously.
Thank you very much, Di. Callum, I'm going to hop over to you next, please.
Yeah, so thanks for that. So I'm going to talk about the issues in one go, really, because I'm not an expert on each of these individual areas. But what I can talk about is my initial instinct, which is when it comes to how we can stop these malpractices elsewhere in the world. I'm a strong believer in self-responsibility and taking action on behalf of your own conscience. I don't want to really live in a country where we outsource our ethics to the government and say, well, we're going to ban this so you can't buy it and X, Y, Z. I want to be able to say, no, I'm not going to buy this because it's the wrong thing to do. And that way, supermarkets will stop importing these goods because the market's not there to then purchase them and to consume those goods. And that's the kind of country I want to live in, is when we say, no, this is, you know, when it comes to things like palm oil, deforestation, if companies, and especially human rights, so there'll be a lot of, I imagine this will be a big part, a big problem over the next few years, especially with the rise of China and the aim of countering it through boycotts and when it comes to the human rights issues there. I just want to make sure that we are self-responsible and socially conscious citizens on our own, not the government making all the legislative bans for us on our behalf. Well, one thing I do know about deforestation is that one thing we could do is plant trees in this country, and then as well as try to reforest, if that's a word, across the world. And which is why it's a bit of a shame that the Welsh government has missed their target of planting 2,000 hectares of trees a year. So that's something I wanted to say. When I did want to also come back on one point, which is because I think in the question you mentioned the supply chain when it comes to food, especially beef. Now, I'm sure this is a bit of a political tightrope for politicians in Wales, because obviously we want to tackle climate change, but we know that farming is the backbone of our community. I'm also the son of a farmer, so I can't really go about saying I'm anti-farming, because I'm not. I think that those kind of issues are quite difficult to do and to talk about, because we can't preach for other people abroad to do X if we're not going to go do it at home. And personally, I'm not willing to sacrifice the farming industry in this country to do that.
Thank you, Callum. I'm going to go to Jane next, please.
Thank you very much. And these are really important questions if we strive to be a globally responsible nation in terms of import and export, and our commitment to our international strategy recognises that. And of course, within that international strategy, our commitment to a meeting, the work we're doing to meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals and ending poverty in all its forms everywhere by 2030. I mean, this actually embraces us in some of these objectives and commitments that we need to look to those crucial global habitats. And I mean, I think I'm very proud, and in fact was involved in developing the Code for Ethical Procurement, which is critically important. It's critically important within business in Wales in terms of our economic contract and what we're prepared to purchase in terms of the public purse. And I think that commitment to Code of Ethical Procurement obviously then has to be values that we imbue in everything that we do in terms of business and opportunity. There's a lot in this question, so clearly we're committed to deforestation. But we've launched our manifesto today, the National Forest for Wales. It'd be great. I think Mark Draper's vision is that you can't go anywhere in Wales without going through the National Forest eventually. Well, why not? We're planting trees. People want to plant trees and plant trees everywhere in Wales, but it's very important that we're actually committed to planting those 25 million trees in one part of the world, in Uganda by 2025. But this is back to values influencing, in terms of business, the economy, looking outwards and actually delivering on our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. But it's actually the Sustainable Development Alliance helps us to ensure that we address these issues in that way in terms of our goals and objectives in government.
Thank you very much, Jane. I'm going to do some bad chairing here and say I have asked you all that question, haven't I? And I can move on to the next question.
No.
Okay.
Lena.
Thanks, Lena.
Hi.
Thank you.
No, so that's fine. In terms of reforestation, yes, we have to take immediate action to protect our natural environment, which includes obviously reforestation as a component, but that's not the only thing. We need to take action on flooding, wildlife conservation, marine conservation, loss of open green space, and that needs to be something that we ensure that we're helping to do worldwide, but also learn from others who've done it slightly better than us. We're allowed to do that. We're not the experts at everything. In terms of the National Forest for Wales, I mean, of course, we support that. But actually, again, we are the party of ambition and we want to go a little step further. So we want to see every town in Wales to be a tree town, with every council preparing a long-term woodland and tree strategy to deliver and sustain a minimum of 20% tree cover in urban areas and 30% tree cover in all new developments, which I think is quite ambitious, but extremely important to the way that we progress. We also need to update and improve tree protection legislation as part of, other legislation that we have in terms of, Welsh planning, as well as increase tree cover on farms with payments under a hedges and edges scheme, and support climate smart and nature friendly farming, because yes, it is doable. We do have a proud history of farming here in Wales. It's something that I hold quite dearly, but there is a way to do both. There is a way for us to keep the climate at our heart, but also keep something that is very dear to us and our farming sector. In terms of ethics and ethical procurement, I think that Jane touched on this briefly, but actually, again, we're going to be a bit more ambitious, and we want to pass the People's Procurement Act, which would require local authorities to commission small businesses and supply chains as a priority, which obviously would have an impact on our sort of climate policies, but also on the global sense. And then we also feel that it's important to ensure that the procurement of government and public sector contracts also involves a risk, impact and equality impact assessment, as well as tenders that are informing those assessments. So that is quite important. We need to take an all-rounded view to equality and not just box it into little pieces, because that really doesn't tend to work. We need to ensure that we, as a Welsh government, as a Welsh nation, as everyone in Wales, are allowed to make those best choices to ensure that we are buying ethically, producing ethically, and also ethically helping out our neighbours and our global community.
Yes, thank you, Lena, and definitely glad I didn't skip you by accident on that round. Apologies. I'm going to hand back over to Rachel, who's going to ask another question. I'm mindful that we've got 10 minutes left, so after Rachel's asked her question, I'm going to summarise the outstanding questions that are in the chat so that you can cover them off in your closing remark or not. But I will also send these questions to you afterwards in case you want to fashion us an answer to them that we can share as WOAG with the people that participated. That will be voluntary, obviously, because we haven't asked you to commit to that. So Rachel, if you want to go, and I'll start summarising some of the points that are coming through on the chat box.
Thanks, Claire. Amazing that this hour is nearly up. This is one of the questions in the chat box, and it's also been a similar question was submitted to us in advance. So again, I'm going to merge the two together. So the Wales and Africa programme, which has obviously already been mentioned during this session, has been a source of great pride, I think, for us for more than a decade, helping us to deliver on Wales's commitment to becoming a globally responsible nation. So the question is, would you continue to support Wales and Africa with a focus on countries where we're working now, or maybe to include or expand to other countries elsewhere in the world? So really, we just want to delve into how your party is going to support the Wales and Africa programme going forward. And Callum, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Well, as it's been apparent throughout my answers here, I don't believe the Welsh Government's role should be here. However, it would be remiss of me to say that it hasn't been a good thing so far. So I don't really want to start, getting rid of something that is just individual schemes that are working. I don't believe it's, if I remember correctly from my research, it's not a very high cost scheme either in the grand scheme of things. However, I wouldn't want to see more such schemes expanded, and it would be good if there was to be more joint working with the UK government on this issue. Thankfully, we're running out of time, so I will keep my answer brief and leave it there.
Thank you, Callum. And I'll come to Jane next, please. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you very much. Well, you know my commitment to the Wales and Africa scheme. We've got another, well, Welsh Government's got another smaller grant scheme that's opening, and obviously we want to encourage community groups to bid for a share of that scheme. But I think what we want to see, and it's been interesting in the year of Black Lives Matter, meeting with Sub-Saharan African, a partnership which includes lots of African diaspora working here in Wales. And I mean, Di mentioned that pioneering refugees doctors scheme, which I helped set up with. I was health minister. I think he was shadow health, and we worked together with Aled Edwards and Katine, and we got that scheme going. But we need to ensure that partnerships, as I said, are African partner led, and that's a crucial role that I know Hub Cymru Africa is taking forward to ensure that there's a clear and active voice in the outcomes that we want to achieve. I think it is interesting to look at, could we scatter ourselves and our very scarce resource further over the world? We have strong partnerships across the world where we are working closely. I mean, for example, we're very closely linked with India through the British Association of Physicians of Indian Origin, who work with us in Wales, and there's lots of community links across Wales, across the world, as well as with Africa. But I think we know where we have to learn and develop with Wales and Africa, and I think that's where we should focus our resources and learn from our partners to make sure it is truly African partner led.
Thank you, Jane. And Lena, I'll come to you next, please.
Thank you. The Wales and Africa programme has been, I think, one of the jewels in the crown that has been our Senedd. I think that it's something that we don't always hear a lot about, but has done a lot of good. And one of the reasons I feel that way is that I am very passionate about ensuring that any work that we undertake as people here in Wales overseas is led by the people who know that place best and those local communities. And that's what I love so much about the Wales and Africa programme. I would like to see it, sort of broadened. And the way that I say that is because we have some partners that we've been working with for a very long time within the Wales for Africa programme, as well as a number of other programmes, who at this point are very nearly ready to sort of stand on their own 2 feet and push their projects in their own nations in their own way. And it wouldn't be true to what we set out to do if we didn't allow that to happen. So we can then move to looking at other projects and empowering even more people to ensure that we are building those partnerships and that we are helping with that cooperation. Do I think that should necessarily stay within Africa? No, but there's no reason that we shouldn't be looking to other projects in Africa, but also, across the world. We've got, Jane's mentioned our links in India. We also have a lot of links in Vietnam, for example. And I'd like to see that broadened, because if we want to take this global approach and we want to do it seriously and not just chat about it in hustings, that's what we should be doing. We should be living through that global partnership and that global approach and looking to our global community.
Thank you, Lena. And last but not least, Di.
Thanks, Rachel. Yes, implied we're big supporters of Wales for Africa. We would look to expand what it can do, obviously. It has done an awful lot. And yes, as Lena mentioned, jewel in the crown, absolutely, very, very apt description. Obviously, a partnership of equals, so we learn from one another and we develop with one another. And particularly as regards international medical research, still much needs to be done, and from international doctors now in Africa. They can teach us a lot. They are teaching us a lot, but they also need financial assistance, not so much knowledge, but they need the equipment and the tech to bring about the eradication of infectious diseases. We keep calling, we all know about pandemics now. It was a little used term a couple of years ago. But basically, there's always pandemics, in Africa and elsewhere. Sleeping sickness caused by a tsetse fly. International medical research is imperiled there. We need to be spending more on this, because a pandemic somewhere in the world is a pandemic in the world, and it should naturally concern all of us. Because certainly as doctors, we stand back sometimes and say, well, why haven't we eradicated TB? We can treat TB. It's just like any other chest infection. Why is it still ravaging and killing people worldwide? Well, we have to take it seriously globally as a partnership of equals. And if we have people suffering somewhere, that means we're all suffering, because we cannot eradicate these diseases from our world. So it behoves us to do the very best to go for total eradication of these nasty pestilences.
Many thanks indeed, Di. Claire, I'm going to hand over to you. We've got a few minutes left, so you've got a big task on your hands now. Go for it.
Big task's my favourite, but we have committed to candidates. We'll finish around 3, so it's on you guys to be quick if you want to get off on time. I can hand this responsibility over, but I'm going to just summarise quickly that some of the questions that have come through are from Sub-Saharan African Advisory Panel about ensuring diversity. We've got a massive diaspora community in Wales, and it's really important that, like, Wales and Africa and development and global development are owned by the people who are kind of most closely connected to it, and how we ensure that happens. And we've got a question on global citizenship and how we integrate global citizenship into lifelong learning from the Wales Alliance on Global Learning. From Wales Africa Health Links Network, we've had one about international development funding broadly, saying while the FCDO do fund a lot of work, lots of that money goes to massive institutions in England, and Wales don't necessarily get to see the benefit of that kind of institutional change. And then we've had a question for Disability Wales and Africa, which is about the UN Convention on Human Rights and specifically the rights of the disabled person. I don't expect any of you to answer all of those points, but just to let you know, if there's anything in that you particularly want to pick up on, please do. But like I said, I'll send them to you afterwards, and I'm going to give you each a minute, if that's okay, so that you can all finish roughly on time. And I am going to go to Jane first this time.
Well, thank you. In 1 minute, please read. I urge you to read my Welsh Labour manifesto. I think you're very pleased to see the commitments to international development in part of the strategy. You'll see our commitment to developing a peace academy, which I think is really important for the IRD, the links with international links with Llangollen and the world, but also as a peace message for young people. Global citizenship education throughout our curriculum and adult and lifelong learning. But can I also thank Paul for the question about how we can fulfill our commitments to the UN Convention for addressing the discrimination against disabled people. This is not just for Wales, where we have a commitment, it is for the world as well. And that should influence what we do in terms of our Wales and Africa grant, for example. And thank you for the great session this afternoon, everybody. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. So I'm going to go to Lena next, please.
Sure. So in terms of the question around lifelong learning, you're never too old to learn. Citizenship needs to be integrated with everything we do. It's integrated through within lifelong learning. That's already being done. And we are expanding personal learning accounts to focus on skills-based development. And it's quite an exciting time, I would say, for education here in Wales. I would say that in terms of ensuring that diverse voices continue to be supported in Wales, we've had so many grassroots organisations pop up, both right before the pandemic and through the pandemic. And these need to continue and they need to be supported in a long-term way. That's something that my party and myself are quite passionate about. And in terms of disability and UN protocol on that, that's something that needs to be put into Welsh law, but also we need to ensure, especially here in Wales, that there is no discrimination in our workplaces, and all of the work that we do around disabilities, we need to ensure that that can be sent out and repeated across the world if it is the right thing, and also learn from other nations. Once again, that is possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lena. And then Di next, please.
Well, thank you. Well, in a minute, thank you all, my fellow participants, first of all, in the hustings, for your attendance and your kind comments, for all the questions from everybody, from wonderful chairing by Rachel and Claire. Absolutely, this has been inspirational, but also the topic is inspirational. And this is about Wales and the world. We need to be getting involved, more so as Wales, getting out there, but also engendering a partnership of equals. There's still an awful lot of a long way to go in tackling poverty, in tackling the rights of disabled people. There's an awful lot of work to be done. We would strengthen our voice in the world as Wales as part of the UN, basically, because we have to be right in there. But basically, it all starts with us personally as well. You can blame the government for a lot of things, but you know, it's your own values and what you do in life is equally important as well. So get out there, do the support, exchange, and you know, get out there and learn and be educated. Diolch yn fawr.
Lovely, thank you, Di. And then I'm going to go over to Callum, please.
Well, thanks for a great session today, and a big round of applause to my fellow panelists today. I think we've all had a good time. I just want to be very quick. I believe the Conservative Party it supports international aid and development. It's the party that introduced the 0.7% target on a statutory basis and only suspended it due to very exceptional circumstances. In between 2015 and 2019, the UK government action has supported 14 million children to gain a decent education, provided humanitarian assistance to over 32 million people, and helped 52 million gain access to clean water or improved sanitation. The Foreign Secretary's outlined 7 challenges it will target, which all together, which I'm not going to go through all now, all together will help tackle global poverty, I believe. On a Welsh basis, one of the things the Welsh government could do better is on climate change, and that means cutting emissions by the UK rate, so it's about half of what the UK rate is right now since 1990. Also building the M4 relief road to relieve the congestion there, as well as getting a bit more detailed and credible decarbonisation strategy. I will simply finish on the point that if Wales votes for independence, how much international aid will Westminster have to give us? Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your participation this afternoon. It's really important. We're really pleased because you know, these international issues don't always get the kind of attention that they deserve. So thank you all for joining. And before I'm going to kind of hand over to Rachel, I also just want to say thank you to Rachel as well. She's been co-chair of Wales Overseas Agency Group, and she is leaving Oxfam Cymru in the next few days. So this is her last outing as WOAG Cymru WOAG co-chair. So thank you to Rachel as well for the support and the work you've done on it. I'm going to hand over to Rachel if she wants to say goodbye, and then we're all going to leave only 5 minutes overrunning. Isn't that an achievement in itself?
Thank you, Claire. I'm afraid I'm not going to leave you with particularly inspirational words, despite being set up for that. But I just wanted to thank you all hugely for coming today. This isn't an issue that's often aired enough in Welsh public life. So I'm really grateful to you all for all your questions and your engagement in the issue. Looking forward to continuing the debate online. You can follow the Wales Overseas Agencies Group and all the members, of course, on Twitter. And I've just put the Twitter link in the chat box if you want to follow us. But yeah, thank you very much for all. And WOAG will be continuing in Claire's safe hands moving forward after I leave Oxfam. Thank you all very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Great.
I'm going to do the awkward ending of a Zoom call where we wave and I end and you'll disappear into the ether. So thank you, everyone.